In a ballroom alive with voices, Leo Grayson stood apart, deaf, ignored, his father dazzling the crowd without once looking his way. Then, a maid's daughter dared to approach. "Hello," she signed, and for the first time, Leo's face lit with joy. But when Richard Grayson noticed, his response would ignite a deeper silence. This is the story of how a forgotten boy, a lonely girl, and a grieving man redefined what it means to truly listen. Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. An 11-year-old girl stood alone, a ghost in a palace of mirrors. She watched the man who owned the palace ignore the one person who mattered most. A question formed in her young mind. How can a room so full of noise be so deafeningly silent? The great hall of the Grayson estate glittered. Chandeliers, heavy with crystal, dripped light onto the polished marble floors. Men in dark suits and women in jewel-toned dresses drifted through the room like elegant ships on a calm sea. Their laughter was a low, constant murmur, the clinking of their glasses a gentle chime. To 11-year-old Clara, hiding near the velvet drapes of the West drawing room, it was another world. She was not meant to be a part of it. She was here only because her mother, Susan, was the head housekeeper, and tonight's charity gala required every available hand. "Stay out of the way, honey," her mother had whispered earlier, her hands smelling of lemon polish and quiet worry. "And please, don't touch anything." Clara had no intention of touching anything. The ornate vases and gleaming statues looked as fragile as spun sugar. She felt like a small, plain bird that had accidentally flown into an aviary of peacocks. Her simple blue dress, the best one she owned, felt like a school uniform in this sea of silk and satin. She clutched a small, worn book in her hands, its cover soft with age. It was a thin volume of poems by a soldier, her great-grandfather's favorite. It was her anchor in this overwhelming place. Her great-grandfather, Henry, had been a war hero. He didn't talk much about the medals that lay in a velvet box on his dresser, but he often talked about the men he served with. He taught Clara that the most important kind of courage wasn't found on a battlefield, but in the quiet moments when you choose to see someone everyone else looks past. "No man left behind, Clara," he'd say, his voice a low rumble. "That's not just for soldiers. It's for people." He had a friend in the war, a man named David, who had lost his hearing in an explosion. Great-grandpa Henry had learned a few things in sign language to talk with him. Just the basics. "Hello, friend. Are you okay? Thank you." He had taught them to Clara, moving his large, gentle hands to form the shapes. He said it was another way of listening, with your eyes. From her hiding spot, Clara's eyes scanned the crowd. Her gaze swept past the mayor, past a famous actress, and settled on the host of the evening, Mr. Richard Grayson. He was the CEO of a massive tech company, a man whose face was often on the cover of magazines. He was tall and handsome, with dark hair touched by gray at the temples. He moved through the crowd with an easy confidence, shaking hands, smiling a smile that seemed both charming and distant. Everyone wanted a moment of his time. He was the sun, and they were all planets orbiting him. But Clara wasn't looking at Mr. Grayson. She was looking at the boy standing in his shadow. In a far corner, partially hidden by a towering marble pedestal, stood a boy who looked to be about her age, perhaps a year or two older. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, but his posture was tense, his shoulders drawn in. His dark hair was just like his father's. While everyone else laughed and talked, he was completely silent. His eyes, a deep, intelligent blue, followed the conversations around him. He watched people's lips move with a fierce concentration that made Clara's heart ache. This was Leo Grayson, the CEO's son. Clara had seen him before, but only from a distance. A glimpse of him in a window, or walking with a tutor in the vast gardens. She knew from the quiet conversations among the household staff that he was deaf. His mother had died in a car accident years ago, the same accident that had taken his hearing. Tonight, he looked utterly alone. Guests would occasionally glance his way, offer a small, pitying smile, and then turn back to the vibrant conversations he couldn't join. A woman in a sparkling red dress patted his shoulder as she passed, as if he were a piece of furniture. Another man leaned down and spoke to him very loudly, exaggerating the movements of his mouth. Leo just gave a tight, polite nod, his expression unchanging. No one spoke to him. They spoke at him, or worse, about him to his father, who would answer for him without ever looking his way. Clara felt a familiar pang in her chest. It was the feeling her great-grandfather had described, the feeling of seeing a man left behind. She watched as Richard Grayson accepted an award, the cameras flashing, the applause echoing through the hall. Not once did he look toward his son. Not once did anyone cross the invisible circle of silence that surrounded the boy. Her mother's warning to stay out of the way echoed in her ears. But her great-grandfather's words were louder. It's for people. Taking a deep breath, Clara tucked her book into the small pocket of her dress. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the symphony of the party. She slipped out from behind the curtains. She walked across the marble floor, her simple shoes making no sound. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, this small girl in a plain dress, crossing the ballroom with a purpose that seemed out of place. As she drew closer, Leo's watchful eyes finally noticed her. He looked surprised, then wary, as if he expected her to be just another guest offering a pointless, pitying smile. He braced himself, his polite mask firmly in place. Clara stopped a few feet in front of him. She didn't speak. Instead, she lifted her hands, just as her great-grandfather had taught her. Her fingers felt clumsy and small, but she formed the sign slowly, carefully. Hello. Leo's eyes widened. The polite mask didn't just crack, it fell away completely. For a second, he just stared at her hands, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then, a slow, brilliant smile spread across his face. It was a smile of such pure, unadulterated delight that it transformed him. The tension left his shoulders. The loneliness in his eyes vanished, replaced by a light of genuine happiness. His own hands, which had been clenched at his sides, rose and moved with a grace that mesmerized her. Hello, he signed back, his movements quick and sure. You know sign language? Clara felt a rush of relief. She answered with the few signs she knew, her movements slow and deliberate. A little. My great-grandfather taught me. Leo's smile didn't fade. Who are you? He asked. She spelled out her name, Clara. Her fingers were stiff, and she was sure she was doing it wrong, but Leo understood. I'm Leo, he signed, then pointed to himself with a flourish. Their conversation was simple, halting. It was built of the few words Clara knew and the many gestures they invented on the spot. She asked him if he liked the party. He wrinkled his nose and signed a word she didn't know, but the expression on his face was clear. Boring. She giggled, and he grinned back. He pointed to the crowd, then puffed out his cheeks and made a gesture like a peacock fanning its tail. Clara understood perfectly. Show-offs. For the first time all night, Leo wasn't just a sad, silent boy in a corner. He was funny. He was smart. And for the first time all night, someone was actually talking to him in a language he could understand. They stood in their own small bubble of silence, a quiet island in the middle of a noisy ocean, and had the first real conversation he'd had all evening. Across the room, Richard Grayson was accepting congratulations, completely unaware that his son, standing just 50 feet away, was smiling a real smile for the first time that night. He didn't see the maid's daughter who had dared to cross the ballroom. He didn't see the silent, magical conversation that was unfolding in his shadow. All he could see was the spotlight. The night wore on, a blur of music and conversation that washed over Clara and Leo, but didn't touch them. Their silent world was far more interesting. Leo told her about his love for stars. He used his hands to show her the rings of Saturn and the vast, swirling arms of a galaxy. He explained that he loved astronomy because it was a beautiful thing you didn't need to hear. The universe was silent, just like him. Clara, in turn, told him about her great-grandfather. She showed him the worn book of poems. She explained that Henry had fought in a war a long, long time ago and had learned the importance of quiet things. She tried to sign the concept of no man left behind, and Leo seemed to understand the meaning, if not the exact words. He nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. Their time was cut short when a stern-looking woman with a clipboard appeared at Leo's side. She was Mr. Grayson's assistant. She didn't look at Clara, her eyes dismissing her as if she were a stray cat that had wandered inside. She touched Leo's arm and pointed toward his father. Her lips formed the words, "It is time for photographs." Leo's bright expression dimmed. The polite, vacant mask slid back into place. Before he turned to go, he looked at Clara. His hands moved quickly in a gesture she didn't know. Then he tapped his chest, pointed at her, and made the sign for friend. He walked away, rejoining the orbit around his powerful father. He stood beside him for the cameras, a perfect, silent accessory. Clara watched him go, a mix of sadness and a strange, fierce joy in her heart. She had done something important tonight. She had seen someone. She slipped back toward the drapes just as her mother found her. Susan's face was creased with worry. "Clara, I was looking for you. What were you doing over there?" "Just talking to the boy," Clara said quietly. Susan's eyes darted nervously toward the Graysons. "Honey, you can't bother them. They're different from us. It's best to keep your distance." Clara looked at her mother, then back at Leo, who was once again alone, the brief light in his eyes extinguished. "But Mom," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He was lonely. Her mother didn't have an answer for that. She just took Clara's hand, her grip a little too tight, and led her back toward the kitchens, away from the glittering world where they didn't belong. But Clara knew something had changed. She had crossed a line, not just on a marble floor, but in her own life. And she had a feeling she would cross it again. The weeks following the gala settled into a familiar routine, yet everything felt different to Clara. The grand mansion, which had once seemed like an intimidating museum, now held a secret. A friend. She performed her small chores, helping her mother with dusting in the vast, empty rooms, her eyes always searching for a glimpse of Leo. Their friendship blossomed in stolen moments. It lived in the quiet corners of the estate, far from the watchful eyes of Mr. Grayson or his staff. They met in the enormous, sun-drenched library. Leo would show her books filled with pictures of distant nebulas and star charts. He would trace the constellations with his finger, and Clara would try to learn the signs for their names. She was a slow student, her vocabulary growing one word at a time. Star, moon, planet, far away. Leo, in turn, was a patient teacher. He would correct her hand shapes gently, a small smile playing on his lips when she finally got a word right. He had a quick, dry wit that only she was able to see. One afternoon, while looking at a book about ancient Rome, he pointed to a bust of a stern-looking emperor and then signed, "He looks like my father before his first cup of coffee." Clara had stifled a laugh, pressing her hands to her mouth. Their favorite meeting place was the sprawling garden at the back of the estate. It was a labyrinth of rose bushes, hidden benches, and a large, weeping willow whose branches created a secret green tent. Under the willow, they were in their own world. Leo told Clara about his mother. She loved this garden, he signed one sunny afternoon, touching the petal of a white rose. She played the piano. The whole house was filled with it. He placed his hand on the wooden bench, closing his eyes. She taught me how to feel the music, the vibrations. A shadow passed over his face. After she died, the music stopped. And then, the silence started. He touched his ear, a simple gesture that conveyed a world of loss. He told her about the accident. It was a memory of flashes and feelings. The screech of tires he had felt more than heard. The sudden, violent jolt. Waking up in a hospital room to a world that had gone completely quiet. His father was there, but his face was a mask of grief. Leo had tried to call out for his mother, but he couldn't hear his own voice. All he could see was the terrible sadness in his father's eyes. "He doesn't talk about her," Leo signed. "Ever. There are no pictures of her in the house. The piano is gone. It's like he's trying to forget her." Clara listened, her heart aching for the boy beside her. He had lost his mother, his hearing, and in a way, his father, all at once. "My great-grandpa says that memories are how we keep people with us," Clara said aloud, then slowly signed the word she knew. "Memory. Keep. People." Leo understood. "My father's memories make him sad, so he hides them." Clara began to see the truth in Leo's words. She watched Mr. Grayson from afar. He was a man who seemed to have everything, but he was profoundly lonely. He moved through his magnificent house like a ghost, his interactions with his son brief and awkward. He would have his assistant schedule Leo's appointments, consult with his tutors, and manage his life. Communication was a transaction, handled by others. Mr. Grayson provided for his son in every conceivable way except the one that mattered most. He never tried to enter Leo's silent world. Clara's mother grew more anxious about their secret friendship. "Clara, you're a good girl, But you must understand our position, Susan told her one evening in their small, tidy apartment above the garage. We work for Mr. Grayson. We live here because of his kindness. We can't overstep. I'm just being his friend, Mom. He doesn't have any others. That's not our place to fix, Susan said, but her voice lacked conviction. She was a kind woman, and she saw the change in Leo. She had noticed him smiling more, spending more time outdoors. She knew Clara was the reason, but fear was a powerful thing. Fear of losing her job, their home. Clara, however, was fueled by something stronger than fear. Every time she felt a pang of doubt, she would take out the small box where she kept her great-grandfather's things. It held his 2 medals, a black and white photo of him in his uniform, and a stack of his letters, tied with a faded ribbon. She would read his words about duty, honor, and looking out for one another. He had taught her that doing the right thing is rarely the easy thing. Her friendship with Leo felt like the right thing. The fragile piece of their secret world was shattered one crisp autumn afternoon. Clara and Leo were in the garden, near the old stone wall that bordered the woods. Leo, a surprisingly agile climber, had scaled the wall to retrieve a kite that had gotten stuck in a high branch. As he reached for it, his foot slipped on a patch of moss. He fell. It wasn't a long drop, perhaps only 6 or 7 feet, but he landed awkwardly. Clara rushed to his side. He was sitting up, his face pale and twisted in pain. He pointed to his ankle, which was already beginning to swell. Hurt, he signed, his hand trembling slightly. Panic seized Clara. She knew she needed to get help, but she couldn't leave him. Stay here, she said, signing the words as best she could. Stay? I get help. She ran faster than she had ever run in her life, her feet flying across the manicured lawn. She burst through the French doors of the main house, her cheeks flushed, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Help, she cried out. It's Leo? He's hurt. A few staff members turned, startled. But it was Mr. Grayson himself who appeared at the top of the grand staircase, drawn by the commotion. He saw Clara, his eyes narrowing in confusion and annoyance at this sudden disruption. What is the meaning of this? He asked, his voice sharp. It's Leo, Clara panted, pointing back toward the garden. He fell. His ankle. Richard Grayson's face went white. He descended the stairs in an instant, pushing past Clara and running out into the garden. Clara followed close behind. They found Leo right where she had left him, trying bravely not to cry. Richard knelt beside his son, his hands hovering, unsure what to do. Leo, are you all right? Can you stand? He asked, his voice loud and strained. Leo shook his head, his eyes wide with pain. He tried to speak, but only a frustrated sound came out. He looked desperately at his father, his hands starting to form a sign. But Richard wasn't looking at his hands. He was looking at his son's ankle, at the dirt on his clothes. He was looking at the problem, not the person. It's all right, son. We'll get you inside. We'll call the doctor. He spoke with the forced calm of a man handling a crisis, his tone utterly disconnected from the scared boy in front of him. Leo's face crumpled in frustration. He tried again to sign, to explain what happened, but his father wasn't watching. He was already barking orders to the housekeeper who had followed them out, telling them to call his personal physician. It was in that moment that Clara saw the chasm between them so clearly. It wasn't a gap of silence. It was a gap of attention. Mr. Grayson was there, but he wasn't present. Leo gave up trying to communicate with his father. His eyes found Clara's. His hands moved, forming a question she now knew well. Are you okay? Even in his own pain, he was worried about her, knowing she would likely be in trouble for this. Clara couldn't stand it anymore. The injustice of it, the sheer blindness of it all, felt like a physical weight. Her great-grandfather's voice was a roar in her ears. No man left behind. She took a step forward. Her voice, when it came, was small but steady. Mr. Grayson. He glanced at her, his expression dismissive. Not now, young lady. He's trying to talk to you, Clara insisted, her courage surprising even herself. Richard looked from Clara to his son's pained face. For the first time, he seemed to notice Leo's hands, which were still trying to form words. He looked helpless, lost. I don't understand what he's saying, he admitted, the words tasting like failure. He's saying it wasn't a big fall, Clara translated, watching Leo's hands. And he's asking if I'm going to be in trouble. Richard stared at Clara, then back at Leo. A flicker of something, shame, perhaps, crossed his features. He saw his son, in pain, comforting the little girl who was his only friend. And he, the powerful father, was nothing more than a bystander. Later that evening, after the doctor had come and gone, confirming a sprained ankle, Clara's mother told her that Mr. Grayson wanted to see her. In his office. Alone. Susan was terrified. Just be polite, Clara. Apologize for being where you shouldn't have been. Don't say anything more. With trembling legs, Clara walked to the lion's den. Mr. Grayson's office was a vast, imposing room lined with dark wood and leather-bound books. A huge desk stood before a window that overlooked the city lights. Mr. Grayson was not at his desk. He was standing by the window, his back to her. "Come in," he said without turning. Clara stepped inside, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. The room was so quiet she could hear the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. He finally turned to face her. His expression was not angry. It was something far more complicated. Tired, sad, and deeply conflicted. "The doctor said Leo will be fine. A few weeks of rest," he said, his tone formal. He paused, studying her. "You are his friend." It wasn't a question. Clara nodded, her throat too dry to speak. "For how long?" "Since the gala," she whispered. He let out a long, slow breath. "All this time, right under my nose." He walked over to his desk and sat down, gesturing for her to take the chair opposite him. It felt like being summoned by a king. "Today, in the garden," he began, looking at his hands, not at her. "When he was hurt, you understood him. I didn't." His own father. The admission seemed to cost him a great deal. "Why?" he asked, his voice low. "Why did you learn to speak with him?" Clara thought of the right answer, the polite answer. But the truth felt more important. "Because he was alone," she said simply. "My great-grandpa taught me that you should never let someone be alone if you can help it." Richard Grayson looked at her then, truly looked at her, for the first time. He saw not just the maid's daughter, but a little girl with an old soul and a spine of steel. "Your mother tells me you are an excellent student," he said, changing the subject abruptly. "That you love to read. That you want to be a teacher someday." Clara nodded, confused. "I would like to make you a proposal," he said, his voice shifting back to the familiar tone of a CEO closing a deal. "I want you to continue your friendship with Leo, but not in secret. I want you to be his companion. Officially." He saw the confusion on her face and continued. "I will pay you for your time, of course. A generous stipend. And I will set up a fund for your future education. A full scholarship to any university you choose. You can become the teacher you want to be. All you have to do is be his friend. And I want you to teach me." The last 3 words hung in the air between them. "Teach you?" Clara asked, bewildered. "Sign language," he clarified. "I want you to teach me what you know. I want to learn to talk to my son." Clara stared at him, speechless. This powerful, intimidating man was asking her, an 11-year-old girl, to teach him. He was trying to solve this problem the only way he knew how, by making it a transaction, a business deal. He was offering to buy a bridge to his own son and was asking her to be the architect. A moral crossroads stood before her. Her mother's fear of overstepping, her own desire for a future she could only dream of, and the simple, aching need of a boy and his father to find each other in the silence. Clara looked at the powerful man in the expensive chair, and for the first time, she did not feel intimidated. She saw past the CEO, past the wealth and the authority, and saw a father who was lost. He was a man drowning in silence, reaching out for the only lifeline he could see. Her great-grandfather had taught her about courage, and she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that courage wasn't just about running into danger. Sometimes, it was about standing still and holding out a hand. "Okay," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I'll do it. But the money, the scholarship, that's for my mom. To thank her for everything. For me, I just want to be Leo's friend. And I'll teach you for free. That's part of being a friend, too." Richard Grayson was taken aback. He was a man who understood transactions, where everything had a price. Clara's simple, unconditional terms were a language he didn't know. He stared at her for a long moment, a complex series of emotions playing across his face. Surprise, confusion, and then a flicker of something that looked remarkably like respect. "Very well, Clara," he said finally, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "We will do it your way." The news of the arrangement sent a ripple of shock through the household staff. Clara, the maid's daughter, was now an official companion to the young Mr. Grayson. There were whispers in the kitchens, curious glances in the hallways. Some were envious, others suspicious. But Clara paid them no mind. Her world had narrowed to two people, a boy who spoke with his hands and a man who was desperate to learn his language. Her mother, Susan, was a bundle of nerves and cautious optimism. A full scholarship, Clara. Do you know what this means? She had said, her eyes shining with tears. You can be anything you want to be. But in the next breath, she would add, just be careful, honey. Remember who they are. And who we are. Clara understood her mother's fear, but she didn't share it. Her purpose was clear. The first lesson with Mr. Grayson was excruciatingly awkward. They met in the vast library, a room so grand it made a whisper feel like a shout. Leo was there, too, sitting in a large armchair with his injured foot propped up on a stool, an amused glint in his eyes. He was their silent observer, their judge. Okay, Clara began, feeling strangely like a teacher in front of her most intimidating student. We'll start with the alphabet. This is how you sign up. She held up her hand, forming the shape. Richard Grayson, the man who commanded boardrooms and built a tech empire, looked down at his own large hand as if it were a foreign object. He clumsily tried to mimic her gesture. His fingers were stiff, his movements uncertain. No, like this, Clara corrected gently, stepping forward and adjusting his thumb. It has to be a closed fist. He tried again, and again. Leo watched from his chair, a small smile playing on his lips. He then signed to Clara. He is a slow student. Clara tried not to laugh. She looked at Leo and signed back, be nice. The lessons became a regular part of their routine, 3 times a week in the library. Richard was a dedicated, if clumsy, student. He was used to mastering things quickly, to data and logic. The fluid, expressive nature of sign language was a challenge for him. His brow would furrow in concentration as he practiced the alphabet, his movements slow and deliberate. He often got frustrated, letting out a heavy sigh when his fingers wouldn't cooperate. During one particularly difficult lesson, he was trying to learn the sign for mother. He kept getting it wrong, mixing it up with the sign for father. I don't understand why this is so difficult, he said, shaking his head in exasperation. From his chair, Leo signed to Clara. Tell him to think about her. Not just the word. Tell him to see her in his head. Clara relayed the message. Leo says you should try thinking about his mom when you make the sign. Don't just think of the word. Richard froze, his hand hovering in midair. The mention of his late wife was a taboo, a ghost that was never summoned. He looked at Leo, whose expression was serious, expectant. For years, he had tried to bury the memories, believing it was the only way to escape the pain. But his son was now asking him to remember. Slowly, hesitantly, Richard closed his eyes. Clara could see the tension in his jaw. He stood there for a long moment, lost in a memory she couldn't see. When he opened his eyes, they were filled with a profound sadness. He raised his hand to his chin, his thumb touching his skin, and formed the sign for mother. This time, it was perfect. Leo's answering smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He nodded at his father. Yes, he signed. That's her. It was a tiny breakthrough, a single word in a vast ocean of silence. But it was a start. It was the first time Richard had allowed himself to share a memory of his wife with his son. He hadn't spoken her name, but he had said it with his hands. And his son had understood. As the weeks turned into months, Clara's life transformed. She was no longer a ghost in the mansion. She had a place, a purpose. She spent her days with Leo. Now that his ankle was healed, they explored every inch of the estate. They built forts in the woods, had picnics by the lake, and spent hours in the library, their silent conversations flowing more easily than the spoken words of the hearing world around them. Clara's sign language vocabulary grew exponentially. Leo was a natural teacher, and he took delight in teaching her new words and phrases. He taught her the signs for different kinds of stars, the names of the trees in the garden, and, most importantly, how to tell a joke. His humor was sharp and observant, and soon, their private world was filled with silent laughter. She also learned more about the profound depths of his loneliness. One day, she asked him if he had ever had friends at school. Before the accident, his life had been filled with birthday parties and playdates. After, he signed, his expression becoming serious, everything changed. I went to a new school, a special school for deaf children. But I didn't fit in. My father, He wanted me to learn to read lips, to speak. He didn't want me to learn sign language. He said it was a crutch. He said I had to live in the hearing world. The cruelty of it struck Clara. In his grief, Richard had tried to force his son to be something he wasn't. He had denied him the one thing he needed most, a language that felt like his own. He had isolated him, not just from the hearing world, but from the deaf world as well. I learned to be a good actor, Leo continued. To nod and smile. To pretend I understood. It was easier than trying to explain. Clara felt a surge of anger on his behalf. You don't have to pretend with me, she said, signing the words with a fierce intensity. With me, you are you. Leo looked at her, his deep blue eyes filled with a gratitude that needed no words. He tapped his chest twice. I know, he signed. Meanwhile, Richard Grayson's lessons continued. He slowly, painstakingly, built a vocabulary. Alphabet. Names. Basic questions. How are you? What did you do today? Each new word was a victory, a single stone laid in the foundation of the bridge he was trying to build. The first time he tried to have a real conversation with Leo, it was a disaster. He approached Leo in the garden, his hands held awkwardly at his sides. Clara was there, watching from a distance. Hello, son, Richard signed, his movements stiff. Leo looked up, surprised. Hello, father. Richard took a deep breath. Did you have a good day at school? The signs were slow, each one a separate, disconnected thought. Leo's brow furrowed. The question was so simple, so generic. It was the kind of question a stranger would ask. For years, his tutors had submitted daily written reports to his father's office. Richard knew exactly what he had done at school, which was really just a series of private lessons in his own home. The question felt hollow, meaningless. Leo's shoulders slumped. He gave a small, polite nod. Yes, it was fine. Richard tried again. Did you study math? Yes. The conversation died. The silence between them was heavier than ever. Richard stood there, helpless. He had the words, but he didn't know how to use them. He didn't know his own son. He didn't know what to ask, what to say. He looked over at Clara, his eyes pleading for help. Clara walked over to them. She looked at Richard and signed, asked him about his drawing. He finished the one of the Orion Nebula today. Richard's face lit up with relief. He turned to Leo. Leo, your drawing. Can I see it? Leo's eyes widened. His father had never, not once, asked to see his artwork. Art was another ghost of his mother, who had been a gifted painter. Tentatively, he nodded. The three of them walked to Leo's study. The walls were covered with his drawings. They were breathtakingly detailed sketches of galaxies, planets, and moons, done with charcoal and pencil. They were silent, beautiful, and vast, just like the world he inhabited. Richard walked around the room, stunned. He had provided the tutors, the expensive art supplies, but he had never truly seen what his son created with them. He stopped in front of a large, intricate drawing of a swirling galaxy. This is incredible, he said aloud, then remembered himself and tried to sign it. He didn't know the sign for incredible, so he simply signed, good. Very good. Leo saw the genuine awe on his father's face. A small, hopeful smile touched his lips. He pointed to a faint smudge of light in the corner of the drawing. That's a new star being born. He signed to Clara, knowing his father wouldn't understand. Clara translated. He says that's a new star being born. Richard looked from the drawing to his son, and a dawning understanding began to cross his face. He was looking at more than just a picture of space. He was looking at his son's soul. A boy who couldn't hear the world had found a way to show its beauty. That evening, Richard Grayson did something he hadn't done in years. He went up to the attic. In a corner, under a dusty white sheet, was a grand piano. His wife's piano. He sat on the bench, the wood cool beneath his touch. He didn't play. He just sat there, in the silence. And for the first time, he began to truly listen. The change in the Grayson household was gradual, but profound. The heavy, oppressive silence began to lift, replaced by the quiet, constant motion of hands. Richard started joining Leo and Clara in the garden, not as an intruder, but as a participant. He would ask Leo questions about his astronomy, and Leo, with Clara's help, would explain the life cycle of a star or the difference between a meteor and a comet. Richard, in turn, started sharing things about his own life. He told Leo about his first invention, a simple piece of code he had written in his college dorm room. He tried to explain the complex world of business, of stocks and mergers, and Leo, to his surprise, seemed to understand the underlying logic of it all. They were two different worlds, science and business, but they were finding common ground. One evening, as the three of them sat in the library, Richard turned to Clara. "Clara," he said, signing and speaking at the same time, a habit he had picked up. "I want to thank you. You have given me a great gift." "You gave my son his voice back," was what he didn't say, but Clara heard it anyway. But their newfound peace was a fragile thing. The outside world, with its noise and its judgments, could not be kept at bay forever. The issue of Leo's education had become a point of contention. His tutors were reporting that he was falling behind in subjects that required spoken instruction. They recommended a residential school for the deaf, hundreds of miles away. The suggestion sent a bolt of panic through Richard. The old Richard Grayson, the CEO, would have seen the logic. It was an efficient solution to a problem. But the new Richard Grayson, the father, felt a visceral, gut-wrenching opposition to the idea. Sending Leo away felt like a surrender. It felt like admitting that he couldn't create a world for his son here, in his own home. He called a meeting in his office. Leo was there, as was Clara, at Richard's insistence. The head tutor, a stern, older man named Mr. Abernathy, laid out his arguments. "Mr. Grayson, Leo is a brilliant boy, but his environment is limiting him," Abernathy said, his tone condescending. "He needs to be with his peers, in a place equipped to handle his disability." The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. "I am not disabled," Leo signed, his movements angry and sharp. "I am deaf." Mr. Abernathy, who could not understand him, continued. "He needs to learn to function in the real world. This reliance on a single companion, this private language they have, it's not preparing him for a life of independence." He glanced at Clara, his meaning clear. She was a crutch, a liability. Richard felt a surge of his old, commanding anger. But before he could speak, Clara stood up. All eyes turned to the small, blonde girl in the simple dress. "You're wrong," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Being deaf isn't his weakness. It's yours. You're the one who can't speak his language. You're the one who is disabled by your own ignorance." The room fell into a stunned silence. Mr. Abernathy's face turned a deep shade of red. He looked at Richard, expecting him to reprimand this impertinent child. Richard looked at Clara, then at his son, who was watching her with an expression of pure admiration. He saw the fire in her eyes, the fierce loyalty. He saw the courage his great-grandfather had spoken of. He turned to Mr. Abernathy. "Clara is right," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. "The problem is not my son. The problem is our environment. And I am going to change it." He looked at the tutor, his gaze as cold and hard as steel. "You are dismissed, Mr. Abernathy. Thank you for your service." After the tutor had sputtered his protests and left, Richard turned to Leo and Clara. A slow, determined smile spread across his face. "We are going to do things differently," he announced. "From now on, anyone who works closely with Leo, tutors, staff, everyone, will be required to learn American Sign Language. We are not sending you to a new world, Leo. We are going to make this world yours." It was a declaration of war on the silence. It was a promise. And as Clara stood between the father and the son, she knew that this was more than just the end of a meeting. It was the beginning of a revolution, started not by a CEO in a boardroom, but by a quiet girl who had dared to speak a language no one else could be bothered to learn. Richard Grayson's declaration was not a hollow promise. It was a corporate directive, executed with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to his business dealings. The Grayson estate underwent a quiet, seismic shift. Memos were issued. Human Resources, an entity previously concerned only with payroll and vacation days for the domestic staff, was suddenly tasked with sourcing and hiring the best American Sign Language instructors in the state. Attendance was not optional. Twice a week, the grand dining room, a space normally reserved for formal dinners and charity events, was transformed into a classroom. Gardeners sat beside cooks, chauffeurs next to housekeepers, all of them fumbling through the ASL alphabet, their work-worn hands moving with a mixture of confusion and determination. For some, it was a burden, another chore in a long day. Clara would see them in the hallways, practicing their signs with frustrated sighs. But for others, it was a revelation. A young footman named Thomas discovered he had a natural aptitude for the language, his signs becoming quick and expressive. He started greeting Leo in the hallways, and Leo, initially surprised, would greet him back, a small, pleased smile on his face. The cook, a warm, bustling woman named Maria, learned the signs for different foods and would proudly show Leo what was for dinner each night, asking him what he wanted for dessert. The world of the mansion, once a place of isolating silence for Leo, slowly began to open up. It was no longer a place where he was an invisible prince, but a home where people could actually speak to him. The invisible circle of silence that had surrounded him for years began to dissolve, one signed word at a time. His new team of tutors was a hand-picked group of educators, all fluent in ASL. They were young, energetic, and passionate. His new science tutor, a man named Mr. Davis, would take him to the estate's observatory, a place that had sat dormant for years, and they would spend hours looking through the telescope, their hands flying as they discussed the moons of Jupiter and the possibility of life on other planets. His literature teacher, a kind woman named Ms. Albright, introduced him to poetry, showing him how the rhythm and emotion of a poem could be translated into the beauty of sign, a dance of words and meaning. Leo was not just learning, he was thriving. He was engaged, challenged, and, for the first time, truly seen in an academic setting. His grades soared, but more importantly, a new confidence bloomed within him. The guarded, solitary boy began to fade, replaced by a curious, witty, and engaging young man. Richard Grayson was the most diligent student of all. He cleared his schedule for his lessons with Clara and for the formal classes. He practiced relentlessly, signing to himself in the car, in his office, in front of the bathroom mirror. He was no longer just learning words. He was learning a new way of thinking, of seeing. His conversations with Leo became more natural, more meaningful. They moved beyond simple questions and answers. One evening, Richard found Leo in the library, sketching in a notebook. "What are you drawing?" Richard signed, sitting down across from him. Leo turned the notebook around. It was a detailed drawing of a hand, a single, elegant hand, with a star cradled in its palm. "It's for Clara," Leo signed. "For her birthday next week." Richard looked at the drawing, then at his son. "It's beautiful. You have your mother's talent." This time, the mention of his wife didn't bring a wave of pain. It brought a quiet, bittersweet warmth. He had spent years trying to protect Leo from the pain of her memory, but he now realized he had only been protecting himself. By silencing the past, he had been silencing a part of his son. "Tell me about her," Leo signed, his expression open and wanting. "What was she like?" And so, Richard began to talk. He spoke of her laughter, which he described as silent fireworks. He told Leo about her love for the garden, her terrible singing voice, and the way she would get a little smudge of paint on her nose whenever she was working. He spoke for hours, his hands and his voice working together, painting a portrait of the woman they had both lost. Leo listened, his eyes shining, drinking in every word. He was finally getting to know his mother, not as a tragic ghost, but as a vibrant, loving person. The silence in the house had been filled not with noise, but with memory. Clara's role in the house had also evolved. She was more than a companion. She was the heart of this new world they were all building. She was the bridge between father and son, the translator, the teacher, and the truest friend Leo had ever known. The scholarship fund Richard had established was real, a growing account that promised her a future beyond her wildest dreams. But her focus was on the present, on the simple joy of her friendship with Leo. As they grew older, inching toward their teenage years, their bond only deepened. The easy camaraderie of childhood settled into a profound, unspoken understanding. They learned to anticipate each other's thoughts, to finish each other's signed sentences. It was a connection deeper than words, spoken or signed, a language all its own, built in the shared silence of the garden, in the quiet understanding of the library, in the thousands of small moments that had woven their lives together. The outside world, however, remained a challenge. While the Grayson estate had become a haven, the world beyond its stone walls was not so accommodating. One afternoon, Richard took Leo and Clara into the city for a rare outing. He needed to stop by a gallery to view a painting he was considering buying for his collection. The gallery was a chic, minimalist space, all white walls and polished concrete floors. The patrons were quiet, speaking in the hushed, reverent tones reserved for art and money. As Leo and Clara were looking at a large, abstract canvas, two well-dressed women standing nearby began to talk, their voices a low murmur. "That's Richard Grayson's son," one of them whispered, not bothering to be discreet. "The deaf one. It's such a tragedy." "I know," the other replied, her voice dripping with pity. "He's quite handsome, but what kind of life can he have? It must be so isolating. And look, he has that little girl with him. I heard Grayson hired her to be his keeper." Clara felt a hot flash of anger. She saw Leo's shoulders tense. He hadn't heard the words, but he could read the pity in their eyes, the condescending tilt of their heads. He had seen those looks his entire life. He turned away from the painting, his face a tight mask of polite indifference, the one he always wore for the outside world. Clara couldn't let it go. She remembered her great-grandfather, a man who had faced down enemies on a battlefield. She knew that some battles were fought with words, and some were fought with silence. She walked right up to the two women. "His name is Leo," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that made both women jump. "And he's not a tragedy. He's an artist. He can probably see more beauty in that painting than you'll see in your entire life. And I'm not his keeper. I'm his friend." The women were speechless, their faces flushing with embarrassment. Before they could stammer out a reply, Richard Grayson was at Clara's side. He had heard every word. He didn't look at the women. His attention was focused entirely on his son. He put a hand on Leo's shoulder and signed, "Are you okay?" Leo looked at Clara, at the fierce, protective fire in her eyes, and then at his father, whose face was filled with concern, not pity. The polite mask fell away. "I'm okay," he signed back, and then he added, "because I'm not alone." Richard looked at the two women then, his gaze cool and dismissive. "I believe we are finished here," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He guided Leo and Clara out of the gallery, leaving the two women in a stunned, shamed silence. On the car ride home, the mood was thoughtful. The incident had been a painful reminder of the world's prejudices, but it had also been a testament to how far they had come. Years ago, Leo would have retreated into himself, and Richard would have been helpless to reach him. Now, they were a united front. "Thank you, Clara," Richard said from the front seat, his eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. "I didn't do anything," she said. "You were my voice," Leo signed from beside her. He reached out and gently tapped her hand with his, a small gesture of immense gratitude that resonated between them. As the years passed, the Grayson estate became known in certain circles not just for its wealth, but for its unique culture. It was the mansion where the gardeners could discuss philosophy with the son of the owner, where the CEO could be seen practicing his sign language with a young woman who was once just the maid's daughter. Clara's great-grandfather, Henry, came to visit one year. He was an old man now, his back stooped and his hands gnarled with age, but his eyes were still sharp and clear. Clara introduced him to Leo. Henry watched as Leo and Clara conversed, their hands moving with the effortless grace of long practice. He watched as Richard Grayson joined them, his own sign still a bit slow, but filled with a clear, paternal love. Later, as Henry sat with Clara on a bench in the garden, he patted her hand. "That boy, Leo," he said, his voice a low rumble. "He reminds me of my friend, David, the one who lost his hearing in the war. The world tried to tell him he was broken, but he wasn't broken. He was just quiet." He looked out at the magnificent house, at the life she had helped to build here. "You did a good thing, Clara. You remembered the most important rule." "What rule is that, Grandpa?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "No man left behind," he said, a proud smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "It's not just for soldiers, is it?" "No, Grandpa," she replied, her heart full. "It's for people." On Leo's 18th birthday, Richard threw a party. It was not a grand, ostentatious gala like the one all those years ago. It was a smaller gathering, held in the garden under a canopy of stars. The guests were not business associates or society figures. They were the people who had become their family. The tutors, the staff who had learned his language, Clara's mother, Susan, and her great-grandfather, Henry. There was music playing softly from hidden speakers, but the air was filled mostly with the quiet hum of signed conversations and the sound of laughter. At the center of it all stood Leo, no longer a boy, but a confident young man on the cusp of adulthood. He had been accepted into a prestigious university to study astronomy, a future he had once never dared to dream of. Richard stood to give a toast. He didn't use a microphone. He stood before the small crowd and he signed, his movements sure and fluid, honed by years of practice. Tonight, we celebrate my son, Leo, he began. For years, I lived in a silent house, and I thought it was because my son could not hear. I was wrong. It was silent because I had forgotten how to listen. He looked at Leo, his eyes shining with love and pride. You taught me a new language, Leo. Not just of the hands, but of the heart. You taught me that a father's job is not to fix his child, but to see him, to truly see him. Then, he turned to Clara, who stood beside Leo. And Clara, a long time ago, you walked across a crowded room and spoke to a boy no one else would see. You were a little girl with the courage of a soldier. You saved us both. You are not the maid's daughter. You are my daughter, in every way that matters. Tears streamed down Clara's face as Leo smiled at her, a look of profound agreement and shared history passing between them. Later that evening, as the party wound down, Leo and Clara walked to their favorite spot under the weeping willow. The book of poems her great-grandfather had given her, now even more worn with age, was in her pocket. Do you remember the first time we met? Leo signed, the moonlight filtering through the leaves. Clara smiled. I was terrified. I thought I was going to get in so much trouble. You were the bravest person I had ever seen, he signed. He paused, his expression turning serious. You didn't just walk into my silence. You showed me how to build a new world out of it. A better one. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a framed drawing. It was the one he had made years ago, the elegant, detailed sketch of a hand holding a single, bright star. I made this for you a long time ago, he signed. I want you to have it now. The star, that's my world. The hand is yours. You held it. You kept it safe. Clara took the drawing, her fingers tracing the glass over the beautiful lines. Her heart felt too full for words. I am going away to study the stars in the sky, Leo continued, his gaze steady and clear. But you will always be my truest friend. The one who taught me that the brightest lights aren't always the ones you can see. Sometimes, they are the people who see you. He reached out, not to take her hand, but to gently tap his fist against hers, a sign of solidarity, of a deep and unbreakable bond. It was a promise of a shared future, built not on romance, but on the profound, unshakable foundation of true understanding. Together, they looked up through the willow branches at the vast, silent universe, two souls who had found their own language in a world of noise. The maid's daughter had not just spoken to the deaf son, she had taught an entire kingdom a new way to listen. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.